This is the Miller Philosopher. If you're a hardcore fan of Tolkien's writings or the movie adaptations or even both, then I think it's time that we had a hard conversation. Not to be edgy or clickbaity, but because I genuinely feel that this is an underlying tension that has been growing over the last few years. That question being, does Tolkien's optimism that underpins his stories and the adaptations have a place in modern society and media anymore? This is something that was inspired when I was watching X-Men 97 episode 5 just last week. Yes, it's a cartoon, but for this topic that doesn't matter. The general gist of the X-Men franchise is the idea of the struggle of mutants trying to coexist with humanity, but oftentimes being greeted with hostility instead. An idea that is championed by the character Charles Xavier. However, in episode 5, many mutants are massacred in their own homeland. And during this event, there is a giant statue of Xavier that is toppled over by accident and falls on a group of mutants trying to find shelter, crushing them in the process. I couldn't help but find myself wondering if this was some kind of symbolism for how lofty ideals often get those such trying to help killed, and how that has been an increasing theme in many shows and movies since The Lord of the Rings came out. Consider, prototypical Hollywood, when studios saw the success that kind of franchise and its theme of optimistic struggle could bring in, money-wise, they tried numerous other attempts to replicate that formula. Yet, all failed until Game of Thrones arrived on HBO. And overnight, the game changed, with the show having familiar settings, character tropes, and even sharing its main actor, Sean Bean, but at the same time being the polar opposite of what Lord of the Rings was. And fans of the series saw this and noted it as well. An adult Lord of the Rings, it was called. Consider, Star Wars, when it was brought back to cinema, tried to replay many of the tropes that made it a benchmark for the last 40 plus years, but also tried to update elements of it to modern sensibilities and morals. And this took a hard turn in The Last Jedi, when portraying Luke Skywalker, one of the heroes of the franchise, and saving one of the most evil characters of the franchise, Darth Vader, to now become a recluse who abandoned his friends and family after trying to murder his own nephew because he felt he was falling to the dark side as well. A story decision that even to this day still haunts the Star Wars franchise, and the fans remaining divided between those who loved it and those who hate it, with zero in between. Consider, Dune, which I've already done a video on pretty much, has already been gaining the most traction it's ever had with its anti-messianic message since the book's debuted in the 1960s. Many people are starting to call the franchise on par with Lord of the Rings, and arguably its successor among new generations of viewers. And then finally, consider Three Body Problem, which has become a huge success on Netflix with its story about how humanity handles an imminent invasion from space happening in 400 years thanks to one of their own betraying the entire species. With many of its characters under various different circumstances making equally drastic decisions, most of them not being good. And anyone who's familiar with the Chinese books that inspired the adaptation know that this does not end well. Basically, shows and movies about the power of friendship, hope, and especially a savior-type storyline are often greeted with skepticism about how realistic that is and how characters can be that hopeful, not fuck up, and even what gender they are and what race they are. To be fair to Tolkien though, the common view, if you will, of anything inspired by him being overly simplistic European-inspired heroes with journeys and whatnot is mostly a misconception. Fans of the book trilogy know that it was set in a dark and depressing period where everything that made Middle-earth beautiful was either leaving or no longer existed in the Third Age. Though to be honest, half the Second Age wasn't that great, and for that matter, neither was the latter part of the first age. So can you really say that was a good time? The departure of the elves and the rescinding of longer lives from people who were descended from ancient Numenor are seen as benchmarkers of this change. And this is even more true with the Silmarillion, which, canonically speaking, takes place long before The Lord of the Rings, where most of the book pretty much is about evil duping and succeeding against the powers of good, if I'm being perfectly frank and honest. Middle-earth is marred, with no one who remembers what it was supposed to look like except the Valar and the Maiar themselves, who most pre-system people don't interact with. Elves were supposed to help people become fully developed, but instead get hijacked by circumstances, good intentioned mistakes, and bad choices that they make, etc. Even when the First Age closes with the final defeat and banishment of Morgoth from Middle-earth, it's a bittersweet victory because so much loss was allowed to happen before that was finally achieved. No one better embodies this depressing reality than the last two sons of Fëanor, Maedhros and Maglor. The good sons, you can easily say, and yet even they failed to get any happy ending. These were the author's intentions while writing these stories over many decades. Yet, art is in the eye of the beholder, and is also subjective. And how many readers and later viewers interpreted these stories in their own minds was what we see now, a simplistic view of good and evil, and that evil will always lose in the end. Even Tolkien's critics fall under this misconception. So again, I ask, has time and society left the ideals of Tolkien behind? I'm going to say yes and no. And hear me out before you riot. Yes, in that the nature of living itself is about change. Everything in life grows and is never static, even when the creatures living want it to be. Of course, this is a reality that Tolkien was well aware of, and hence how he writes the elves. So, therefore, it's natural for people in latter ages to look at Tolkien's works and inspired movies with different perspectives, different nuances and different beliefs which to critique them with. Nuances that weren't there before but are now. Or that Tolkien was never really affected by when he was alive, but that nuance is now filtered the lenses of what later people see them as. For example, Tolkien was not a racist, nor was he hateful towards gay people. Yet many in the last decade have come to ask, where are the multiple ethnicities that populate the real world in Tolkien's Middle-earth? Do they not exist? Are they just relegated to the far-flung edges of Middle-earth, never to be dealt with or seen? Or destined to be seen as enemies of the noble West? And did the closest of any of these relationships that happen in these stories potentially result in gay relationships? Or was there even any room for that? There are many Middle-earth artists who often draw these scenarios in their artworks, because again, that is how they interpret Tolkien's art. However, I also say no to this as well, that Tolkien's ideals were not outdated or left behind, because by the same argument that I just mentioned before, people still want that kind of world on some level. A world where even if it's a misconception of the author's intent, many want a simplistic goal that they can strive for and want to be a part of, to be a part of something more, to be better than themselves, even if it's arguably impossible. The Three-Body Problem is a fantastic series, but it's also deeply cynical of human nature and the nature of the universe for that matter, and finds little to no elements that inspire humans to be anything more than what they are, nor rewards them at the end for that. I've even seen people not familiar with the books trying to add that particular spin to it, and just find myself thinking, you are going to be very disappointed when this is over. And honestly, that's the beauty and timelessness of Tolkien's works and inspirations. It connects with people on a subconscious level of wanting something more out of the world than what the world currently provides them with. Hell, that's the story of the Silmarillion if you really look at it. And They want to enjoy and or be a part of that struggle to achieve that as much as possible, no matter what method or what angle they're coming from. And that much I can definitely appreciate. But let me know your comments below about what you think. Otherwise, this is the Miller Philosopher, and y'all have a good day.